Harmon Madsen, who is a vice president at Liquid Thread, which is the branded entertainment arm of MediaVest. Since this is a panel about brand storytelling, we thought we'd start with a little story about each of the panelists to have you know them before we get in the questions. So the story about James is that, and you haven't heard him speak yet, but you'll know right away, he's an Aussie. He's been in the US for 6 years, and he's already had an experience that most of us couldn't imagine in a lifetime. He was on a shoot where he got to introduce, and imagine these two characters meeting, Mariah Carey and Martha Stewart. So he has some tales about that. All of us have been in roles where we have trouble explaining what we do. So Michelle in Branded Entertainment tried to explain to her daughter what she was doing when she joined Liquid Thread. Now, in Michelle's background, she's also worked with American Idol and So You Think You Can Dance. So when she explained to her daughter what she was doing at Liquid Thread, her daughter said, well, at least people believe that, Mom. No one ever thought you were working on American Idol or So You Think You Can Dance. And Tyler's creativity as the creative director extends well beyond DeVito Verity. He has published a book, you're going to love this title, Learn Just Enough to Get Laid. Right? I was intrigued enough about it that I went on Amazon to see that it has 4 stars. And people have quoted about it. It's hilarious novelty with some actual takeaways. Fox is interested in making a sitcom out of it, so we'll have to see what he does with that. And now bringing us back to the conference, if you look in the lobby outside, Tyler has created a gumball machine. And if you check in on Foursquare, you should be able to get a free gumball. So Tyler is expanding his creativity to conferences as well. As we get into the questions, one of the challenges for digital out-of-home is that it's often considered a promotional medium more than a branding medium. So I'd like each of the panelists, James, why don't you start with this one, to talk about what your favorite digital out-of-home brand storytelling campaign that you've been involved with is about.
Yeah, I have a few actually, and for different reasons. So the epic side of things, when I first moved to New York at JWT, I was working on the A Diamond is Forever campaign. And the idea for the campaign was diamonds as words. So obviously when guys are gifting, they get choked up, they don't quite know what to say, but a diamond says everything. And we came up with that idea, and what naturally fell out of that was out of home, because it actually doesn't have any audio on it. And we actually had the NASDAQ and Reuters sign at Times Square during the Christmas period. And we had these amazing images of diamonds up there in quotations. So that was pretty epic, coming to New York and actually being able to have some major out-of-home at Times Square, first time around. Some of the other things that we've done is a bit different, I guess. And we've had lots of conversations leading up to this about, what is digital out-of-home. But in terms of, I currently work on Macy's at JWT, and we're doing some interesting things, and it's not necessarily with regard to, screens with videos on them, but how we actually augment, an out-of-home experience with technology. And there are 2 things that we've worked on. One is called Macy's Backstage Pass, and what we do is we actually bring our celebrity designers into the hands of people all around the country. Women are looking for fashion tips as they shop. So what we do is we put QR codes in store, and when they activate the QR code in the designer's department, they can get tips and fashion advice right there in the department from that designer. So what we're doing is really bringing sort of entertainment into the shopping experience. We're making it informative. What we also realized that we needed to do to get people to engage was to add a reward and an incentive. So we added a very simple sweepstakes component to it, where you could instantly win a gift card on your phone to shop in-store or online right away. So it's sort of an interesting use of technology augmenting what would be, a poster or an out-of-home experience. And something that I think is close to my heart is we've created a piece of content called Yes, Virginia. We have a campaign called Believe that we created for Macy's. And what it's all about is believing in the spirit of the holiday season. And who better to tell that than a girl called Virginia, who in 1897 wrote a letter to the sun, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. So to tell the story, we created some branded content. And what we did last year, we actually had an augmented reality experience in stores. So we set up an area, we had a marker in the floor, you would download an app, and kids could go in and get their photo taken with Virginia, create letters, and send them through social media to family and friends. So again, different way of using out of home, but really using digital, I guess, to augment an out-of-home experience. So they're sort of a couple for me that I've enjoyed working on.
All right, so I'm noticing, I'm looking at the screen, I'm noticing I have credentials that I'm probably not qualified to have. Yeah, so I'm the creative director at Vito Verdi, and I even when we first got presented with this idea that I'd be speaking there, I had to sort of even ask myself, like, what have I even done that's digital out of home? And then it's that thought process of just going through that, it sort of occurred to me. We've done a couple things, and it's just, I think we'll probably talk about what it even means for digital out of home and creativity and storytelling. But I'll just give you two quick examples of a couple of different projects we've worked on. We do a lot of retail at the Vito Verdi, and so one of the projects we worked on was for Daffy's, which if you live in New York City, you probably, you've seen a Daffy's. And the idea was to launch, now Daffy's is an off-price retailer, so it's like a TJ Maxx or a Marshalls where you don't really, every time you come you could see different clothes. They don't necessarily have lines of clothes or operate by season like a bigger department store like a Macy's would. So what we had was we were tasked with showing what the new line of fall fashions was. And we decided to do this idea during Fashion Week, I think, not last year or the year before. And the way we figured out how to launch this the fall fashions and get people to see some of the styles that they did have was to create, I guess I called them Hue mannequins. And so we had this store, and it was in Herald Square. And so one of the things that Daffy's does have is they have a lot of storefront space. And if you're in New York City, you can almost think of, depending on the kind of, if you have a client, in our case, that does have a lot of stores, the windows of the stores actually become a media space. And so what we did is in the window in Herald Square, we created these Hue mannequins, and they were human mannequins. And we had a guy on one side, and we had a girl on another. So you got to understand, like, in Fashion Night Out, there's a lot of competition for attention, and so we had to create impact to cut through a little bit of that. And so each one of these Hue mannequins had 3 different styles of clothes. The guy had 3 styles, the woman had 3 styles, and they got changed out. And when people would pass by on the street, they could text what style they wanted the human mannequin to try on. And of course, when you, and I'm sort of like, as I'm going through my thought process, like the book and now this, I sort of seem like a pervert, but I'm not. This is just a coincidence. When you would text the Hue mannequin what to wear, they would take their clothes off, they would turn to the style of clothes that they wanted to put on, and then they would change into that outfit. So, and then we had this huge screen that would show the text. When you text one of the Hue mannequins, your text would show up on the screen, and then their text back to you would show up on the screen. And it was really great. We had, at one point, there were so many people in front. Anytime you have, is advice to creatives, and it's a bad way to do it, but even any time you have people taking off their clothes, you're going to get a lot of people, pay attention. But we had so many, there was, cops had to break it up. They had to, they had to close it down for a couple hours, so that was kind of fun for me. But it was a good way of people to interact with the store and to get a huge crowd around the store, and the product was very at the center of the idea. Another quick one we did was for Meijer, who's it's like a super Walmart of the Midwest. And the idea for this was very simple, was to just make people in downtown Chicago know what Meijer, know that they have a lot for Halloween. This is for Halloween. So we just decided to turn Chicago. This is I guess definitely a story how to use it for storytelling. Is we wanted to create downtown Chicago into Sleepy Hollow. So we started the campaign by creating a bunch of different wanted ads for catching the Headless Horseman. And there was a $1,000 reward, and then there was other rewards for other people who catch them. You catch them by taking a picture with your cell phone. And so we had this van that projected this 100-foot fire-breathing Headless Horseman down on any building that this van passed in front of. So we just drove it downtown Chicago, and people snapped the picture of the Headless Horseman to catch him, and then some of those people who caught him by taking a picture won money to go to Meijer to get Halloween stuff. So those are a couple different ideas.
Michelle?
All right, I'll give you a couple that come to mind. And I think, when you think about the space of digital out of home, one of the things comes to mind is we think some of the big and flashy. And I'll tell you about one of my favorites there. But I also love simple, meaningful experiences. And I often tell my team, simple is gourmet. And because sometimes you can create the right kind of message in the right place, you really have connected with the consumer. And for any of you who commute, and years ago, I actually, living here in Manhattan, I commuted to New Jersey, and so I spent a ton of time in the car listening to the radio. But one of the programs that we did was actually take radio without a home for Comcast. And they provide services every day for consumers. They want to connect. They're at home with you on their television. And so the idea that came to life there was they wanted to provide traffic reports. Very simple. Let's be the sponsor of that. Let's bring them to life. Well, not just on the radio, but let's get the digital out-of-home sign, giant saying, back up at the GW, go to the Lincoln Tunnel. To me, that's critical information, and I love those kind of things. And again, it's something simple, but that real-time information, that's something only this format can really bring to life, and bring to life in a meaningful and relevant way, I think is really impactful. When I think about big and glitzy, one of our clients who I think did a phenomenal job on Dick Clark's Rocking New Year's Eve, hopefully all of you were up till midnight and watching, but it really, of course, highlighted the Times Square area, which was talked about earlier. But they not only really looked at it from how could they make it be a promotion, but how they really could fuel their branding campaign and start the promotion leading up to it. So this might be a highlight piece, but really a continuation of what their conversation was. And they actually owned and took over 5 of the largest screens. And so not only did the 1.5 million people who were standing in Times Square get to be delighted by what was there, but it also delighted the on-air audience. And so they simulcast Pitbull, who was one of the featured artists that night. There was texting, their big Be Bold campaign, and people were testing on how they were going to be bold for the New Year's, which certainly tied into creating New Year's resolutions. But it was really driving the conversation with consumers, as well as really providing a unique opportunity to delight consumers in a place where, frankly, I've never stood there myself, being a New Yorker, but I can't imagine actually standing there for as long as people do. But it was huge success with record numbers for the clients, so they were thrilled. And that, to me, was kind of a classic big example.
Well, as you just heard from the panelists, digital out-of-home can take many forms. So Tyler, why don't we start with you, then Michelle, then James. Talk a little bit about whether you think creating digital out-of-home ads is more like creating for out-of-home, for digital, for video, or something we haven't even thought about.
Sure. So, the way I approach it, it's hard for me to give you, I wish I could give you just a straight answer for that, but the way that I approach is that I always start, coming from the creative side, I always start with an idea. There are times when, like when the Daffy's example, I know what medium that I'm going to be creating for, so the idea will come from that. But I think that, what I try to do is have an idea first, and then decide, what is the best way for me to execute that in that medium, especially if we're talking about a story. And a lot of times that it does, especially when we're doing a campaign for a retailer where there's, all retail really is local. Even if you're a huge chain, it's still local. And so I think the proximity to a store is really important. I think that then once I sort of get to that point, I'm like, okay, what's the best way for me to have this? If I use a story, do I want to interact with it? And that's how I sort of pick the medium. But what I think is really important in developing for any of these is when I think about what execution it'll have, is that the ideas that I try to come up with all have at least three things if I can, which is they have to be, like you said, they have to be very simple. They have to have context. They have to have something that you can relate to, and there has to be some kind of truth to it. And I think if you have those things, it'll work in digital out-of-home media just as well as it work in other medias. So.
Great, thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, no, really kind of building on what Tyler's saying. When you start with the idea, is absolutely the way we work, and kind of creating what the content platform would be. But it's the fun about this format is that you really can have inspiration come from a variety of different places. And digital is very obvious, but I love traditional out-of-home, because if you've got a smart out-of-home placement, like that can translate well or be adapted into something that could be created then for a larger piece. 30-second ads don't translate so well, but can we adapt to some of the things to fit it? Yes, but it's really coming up with the key kind of brand storytelling opportunities that help bring the whole program to life. And so a lot of what we think about is, where's the consumer going to see this? How are they going to see it? What will the time of day be? I mean, literally from post cereals, talking about something for breakfast time on your way to work, to one I would like to see in the afternoon is perhaps Heineken. We could go meet your friends and have some fun. So it's really thinking about where that is going to be relevant and contextually relevant, and then how can you draw from places that you have to kind of create the story that makes sense.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think working in retail, but also we really run the brand aspect of retail. From a media standpoint, from my experience, if we've got to get a price message across, we've got to talk about items, in terms of from a media planning perspective, it makes sense. You've got to get eyeballs on these messages. You've got to drive sales. People need to purchase. When it comes to the other side of things, in terms of the actual brand storytelling side of things, for me it's important that the execution comes out of the idea. So we have a brand campaign, and then it naturally flows into a space that is for out of home. I think also what's really important is that when you're actually working with creative teams and you're helping them navigate the out of home experience, it's really important that they understand the context of the out of home environment, because we were talking earlier, there are so many different out of home environments. You've got airplane advertising, you've got taxis, you've got your traditional out of home at Times Square. But from a consumer standpoint, they're always in a different frame of mind when they're interacting with that screen. What's their attention span? What's the purpose? There's a difference between, walking through a train station when in a rush and you might have 5 seconds to glimpse a piece of communication, versus maybe being in a Macy's store where the customer is actually looking for information and looking for advice. So it's important to contextualize for the creative team exactly what the consumer is going through in that frame of mind, so that we can tailor that experience for that particular medium. Yeah.
Next question. Mobile's been described as the frenemy for out of home. On the one hand, it allows a new way for consumers to interact with out of home, but the other side is smartphones are in their own way a small billboard. So would each of you, and Michelle, let's talk with you, and then we'll circle back. Would each of you talk a little bit about how you feel about mobile as a frenemy to out of home?
To me, it's simple. I feel that you have to embrace it. It's not going away. And so to pretend that we're gonna stop using our cell phones, forget it. Everyone's got one in their pocket, and probably a couple of you are on it right now. And so when we think about screens, we think about all screens. We think about the digital out-of-home screen, we think about mobile, your TV, and that's how we really approach business this way at the agency itself. And so I will certainly admit, I would never expect nor encourage clients to always put a hashtag or QR code or something on all of their digital out of home. I don't think that works. I think it has to only be used where there's a relevant application. But where you can, and to show how you drive engagement and cross media, I think it's a win. I think it's a win for the platform, and I think it's a win for the brand and the consumers.
Great. I think they work together. I think great ideas these days are media agnostic. And I think also especially what we're looking at with Macy's and with JWT is this group of millennials that's coming through. There's a lot of focus going on them. It's a completely different frame of mind. These people are distracted with their devices. I know we are, but they take it to a whole other level. They are looking to use their mobile phones while they're interacting with other forms of media. There's a movement, with television at the moment, second screen. They're sitting there with their iPads and their iPhones, looking at content through their screen and engaging with their friends. And I think there's a huge opportunity for out of home to actually take that experience that they're having with that piece of media and actually taking a piece of it with them. So I think that there's an opportunity with out of home and mobiles to work hand in hand. And I think especially with this millennial generation, and the big push for socialization, that it's absolutely necessary. And I think that they will continue to work hand in hand, even more so as time goes on.
Yeah, I think that digital mobile can definitely work with out of home as far as helping tell a story. But the one thing that I would caution in using it, and where I think there could be a frenemy relationship, and this happens a lot to the younger creatives that come to me, but also even some senior people, is that especially when you're trying to tell a story, getting complicated can happen very quickly. And especially if you're on the street and you're walking down and you say, okay, here's what happens. This is a typical conversation I'll have. A young creative will come up to me. Usually I'm hoping that they're young if they're coming to me in this respect. They say, okay, well, this is what's going to happen. First, the person, it's going to be called this is the, and then what's going to happen is we're going to have them to go on their phone, then they're going to check in on Facebook, and then they're going to scan this thing and download an app. And I'm like, oh my God, no one is going to do that. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about right now. So the thing we have to, the marketing word I would use, that I hate marketing words, but if I was going to use one, I would say the barrier of entry, especially in out-of-home and telling a story, has got to be extremely small. Like, your idea has got to be so simple that, like, a little small child and, like, some old person half into dementia still understands what the idea is. And there's very little, the least possible interactivity that they have should be what you ask them to do. If you have things, and I'm sort of becoming a little bit over QR codes. I've used them for a while. I don't want to say that I'm over them, because if there's an idea that uses them really well, then I'm like, that's great. But even still, with a QR code, you have to have a QR code reader, which is, or you have to have a service that you don't, there's just like layers. And unless you're giving really compelling content or someone's really into the idea, the interaction rates are going to be low. So I would just say the caution is that mobile is definitely an out-of-home media. There's definitely ways of using mobile to help tell the story, but be very cautious about how many loops you're asking someone to go through to understand the point of your story.
Oh, I would definitely agree with that. I think it needs to be simple. And I think from the QR side of things, which is interesting, I think a lot of these days people are actually just, QR codes are the rage. And the thing is, people are thinking about QR codes as QR codes. A QR code really isn't anything. It's a link to more information. And a lot of people are just whacking a QR code on something and running their 30-second TV spot behind it. And what we've learned through Macy's Backstage Pass is that there are 3 things you must do if you're using a QR code. It needs to inform people, it needs to provide entertainment content, and you need to reward them. And really, without those 3 things, you're really not going to have a great QR experience, I would say. And a lot of people, I think, are overcomplicating things. There's time for complication, but there's certainly times where people do want a more in-depth experience when they have more time.
And I also think it'd be better if we're talking about the role of out-of-home media in terms of telling a story. That's not going to be, that's not a promotion. That's something that you're giving. It's more about branding. And so I think it's important to ask yourself, what do we want to get out of this? Which I don't want to jump too far ahead, but what is the outcome of the story, and how is this going to, ultimately in the end, if it's not answering, anything we do has to solve a communication problem. So if it's not, what communication problem are we solving by telling a story in digital out-of-home? And I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
Michelle, do you want to add anything to the conversation? Or?
I think we've beat this one to death.
Great. Well, traditional out-of-home has clear guidelines, the type size, everybody's familiar with that. So Tyler, let's start with you as the creative, and then everybody jump in. What guidelines would you suggest creatively for the digital out-of-home industry?
Well, there's two things. Coming from a creative perspective, there's guidelines in creativity, and then of course there's technical guidelines. I think that when we're talking about digital out-of-home media, there's not a lot of, it's not like a TV ad where it's been created basically the same way for dozens of years, where I know what format it is, I understand what it is. You have similar complications technically as you do with like on web, which is that there's many different formats. So you want to make sure that the creative fits the format that you're creating for. But I think I go back to some of the things I spoke about creatively guidelines, I would say is definitely that there has to be clear, it has to be simple, you want to communicate, but I'd also say be cautious of what are you communicating. If I'm going to communicate impact, that's going to guide the way that the message is going to be created. If I want to drive to the store, if I'm using proximity, I want you to come into the store, I can still have a story. For instance, like we just did something with another thing with Daffy's, which is also sexual. So I'm really going to have to go back and think about my work. Where it was in Times Square, and I wanted to bring back the Peep Show because they were launching a big new store in Times Square. I said, "What is Times Square?" I said, "I said let Times Square." What was that? It was like it's time Times Square became Times Square again. But Daffy's is all about value, and it's up to 80% off. So I use the Peep Show to show what 80% off looks like. This is a little juvenile, but it worked. So it was, again, it was in the store, and we had you'd go up to the wall and you put your hand on the wall instead of putting a quarter in. You put your hand on there, and then someone would start taking off their clothes and show you what 80% off looked. But then there's a message: you want to see more, come downstairs. So there was in an area where there was a lot of battle for attention. I went really cheap trying to get your attention, but there also was a way to sort of drive you downstairs into a story, and it still was a story, but the guidelines, I would say, for that, which you would want to think about, is the object is to capture someone's attention and put them downstairs. So that sort of affected how we created the ad as well. If that answers it.
Michelle?
How do you follow a peep show? Can I just say that out loud? I think the first thing that crossed my mind when you kind of asked this question, Ellen, is so many of the guidelines that were kind of set for traditional out-of-home absolutely apply, because you want that readability, you want that interaction and that engagement. But I think what's so fun is that when you do the simple example of you're driving in your car, you're sitting in traffic, or you're pumping gas at a gas station with gas station TVs. Those are three very unique, separate experiences and very meaningful that you can create very different content for. And I think it's really kind of going back to the context, keeping that in mind and creating something that makes that experience be interesting and relevant for the consumer. Because without that, you're going to lose them. And I think that's why, some of the examples that have been happening late, whether they are, something giant happening in a place like Times Square, or for that matter, some of the cinema, it really can be much more impactful. So I think it's constantly thinking about creative in the right context.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think context is everything, and I think the consumer frame of mind is everything. When we're briefing teams, it's important to show them work in that and from that environment, show them great case studies, just so they can really get their head around it. There are things like some screens have audio and some don't. And again, back to that time span. If someone's got, like at Times Square, when we did that, the work for A Diamond Is Forever, it took a while to convince the creative teams, although we had 30 seconds, that not necessarily someone's going to be looking at that screen for 30 seconds because there is so much going on that we're probably going to get about, 5-10 seconds maybe, and they'll come back to it. But it's important that we don't have downtime. We need to hit messaging throughout that to see that people actually can see what we're trying to communicate. So it's important to get the context and to really understand that specific screen or that augmented digital experience, what tools are there, and really define the brief.
Well, this audience is here for takeaways, so I'm not letting go of the concept of advice. And I'd like to ask each of you, James, why don't you start with this one, about what advice you'd give to the digital out-of-home industry about how to attract more of your business.
Yeah, I think it's interesting coming back to the idea of case studies. I think that there's a few things. First of all, there are a lot of screens out there, and we had a broad discussion around what is digital out-of-home. And to be honest, I hadn't thought about it that much. And then when I actually did sit down and think about it, I realized how much I engage with it. I see Captivate in the elevator. I'm in cabs all the time. I sit on planes. I walk through Times Square. So to really contextualize what it is and define what the industry is, I think is interesting. To actually then show case studies to creative teams and really get in at a grassroots level, especially if we're looking at brand storytelling, and show people how brands are telling great stories. And I think that the awards this evening is a great way to highlight people who are producing great work and to get that message out throughout the advertising community.
Well, let's let Michelle not be last this time.
Yeah. What was the question again?
Advice to the digital out-of-home industry.
How can I forget? You know what? I really, when I started talking to my team as well as some of our other team, I really think what's exciting is all the changes that have been made. Because if you think about the out-of-home industry from even just a decade ago and how it really was passive, and now it's all about active engagement and sensory environment and even personalization, I actually think much of your role is really helping us to create some of these new ideas, to really be our partner in how this is coming to life. Because frankly, it is new technology, and from projection mapping that's happening on buildings, all the things that are happening, I really think it's a great conversation to be happening because you're thinking about things even before we've come up with some of the brand stories. So to me, it's back to kind of business 101, where I feel like now that you all are, I'd say, digital companies, more so than I'd say out of home in some ways, it's really kind of building the collaboration to kind of help us create the stories that make sense and help craft the details to kind of make them really be relevant.
Yeah, and I think that if I was on the other end, I'd want to help push creatives to create content for my platforms that best utilize the space. So I even wouldn't be afraid of pushing back on creatives that say, well, or not even creatives or agencies that said, let's just run this TV thing, and we'll just put this thing we'll repurpose this content, just throw that up. I think that in itself probably would hurt. Something that could hurt the industry more than anything else is the improper use of the space, because then the results come back that are bad. And if you're just sort of looking at it from a client's perspective, well, it didn't work. Well, the creative didn't work. Well, the person who sold the space could have been able to help the creative. So I think that helping utilize, because a lot of innovation is driving this industry right now, and because there's innovation, because there's so many media channels to use, getting the top of mind of the creatives and also the account people and the media planners of what to do with this innovation is really important, so that you get credit for the innovation that's coming out of this industry right now. So I think the most important I would do would be thinking about is getting credit for the innovation that's occurring.
And I think just to further that in terms of the innovation, and Michelle's point also about that everyone now is almost a digital agency, there are a lot of ways to augment the experience. We're looking into things like using, Shazam and different applications that can capture audio that then pull you into your second screen. So there's a lot of other cross-technology platforms that can be integrated into digital out of home that would be sort of interesting to get in front of agencies and creative teams.
Tyler, you mentioned results. It's quite easy to tell if a promotional digital out-of-home campaign works, but what kind of pressure are you under, and how are you responding to it about how clients are trying to evaluate the effectiveness of digital out-of-home campaigns that are more storytelling?
Yes, me? Yeah. Okay, I'll jump in.
Go for it.
Well, I think it's important is to be able to, if you create an idea that's based on storytelling, is to make sure that the metrics that you set up ahead of time reflect that, and not to, because I think that you can get into problems when you're creating a story. This happens online all the time. You're creating a story and someone says, well, how many visitors went there? Okay, well, we could talk about how many visitors there, but is that the right metric to be looking at? And if we're talking about storytelling, well, let's look at the cash register. Well, if you're creating a story and the best metric for that is top of mind awareness, that's a lagging indicator. It's not something that you're going to be able to look at a cash receipt, and you don't want that to screw up the idea or make it look like it was a failure. So I think that it goes back to, one thing that I always try to go back to is that there's the fundamental marketing 101, and even though we're doing a lot in digital, not to forget what the role and the purpose of the media is, and not to forget what the expectation of it should be. So if we're creating branding storytelling, I think it's important to say, okay, maybe it's top of mind awareness, or maybe it's something else, or maybe it's, I think that's more important.
Yeah, no, I would just really follow up with that. Measurement is always important, and all of us here with the clients, and I work predominantly on Procter & Gamble. Let me tell you, we measure everything. But what I think is really interesting is that data really drives how we can actually be more creative and how we can create more stories. And so the more we can have that conversation on what is some of the data points and how to do it, helps us really craft and make a better story and make better results and make a better meaningful experience. So when I've sat kind of on the media side of the table, in prior lives, when the concept of measurement data, you're like, okay, here it comes. But it's actually really helpful. So I think, again, just kind of as mobile, I feel like it's another something that to embrace as the industry evolves into all these new chapters and new technology. It's something that's helpful to both sides to really kind of strengthen what the power comes from the medium.
And I think to that, defining the metrics up front for us is everything. Because with brand work, exactly to Tyler's point, you'll sit down after the fact and the client will be, well, we only got so many downloads, or we only got so many views, and you can't really measure experience in that way. The value in a branded engagement is much more significant. We've got a great analytics team at JWT, so what we'll often do is sit down with the work, and then we'll actually go into our clients and talk through what deliverables we think we should be hitting. And with a lot of the branded work, fortunately with Macy's, we're experimenting with so many things with augmented reality, with Macy's Backstage Pass and bringing this content to customers in store, that we're in a position where we're able to experiment, and that each time we do it, we just want to better where we were before. And so many things that are happening in this space are happening for the first time. So there often aren't metrics, and every campaign is so unique. We often were looking for campaigns that were similar to define what benchmarks should be, and then realized that we're potentially setting ourselves up for a tricky situation because the campaigns we create are so unique in brand storytelling that that you can set yourself up for failure. And you realize if you want to do it year on year, and you set up a measure of success that is achievable, you're in a great space. What we also do often is we actually go in there and talk to people while they're actually engaging with the branded storytelling experience and actually ask them how they felt about it, get a sense of what their engagement was, what the message outtake was, and how it's affected their perceptions towards the brand, because they're really the things that we're looking for. You almost can't measure it in a digital sense. You've got to speak to the people to actually get that information. So we're really sort of exploring the space from a metric standpoint and really finding our way.
I have more questions I can ask, but I thought we might want to allow you the opportunity to ask some questions. So any questions from the audience? They've completely stumped you. All right, well, I'm going to ask oh, there we go.
What is it exactly that you guys are doing to expand that campaign now?
Yeah.
You mentioned augmented reality and deeper experiences in the store.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started out with actually just with QR codes and delivering this information to customers in store. And this comes back to the learnings that we've had, is that we realized we need to do three things with it. We need to inform, we need to entertain, and we need to reward. So in the second season, we incorporate a sweepstakes component. What we also realize is that in that environment, that people are shopping, they want to spend. So it's an instant win gift card that you can get. We're also incorporating the ability to shop for that collection through your device. Macy's are building out their mobile platform significantly. They're doing quite amazing things in mobile. So you can actually experience the designer in the department, and you can shop as well on the device. What's an example? So for example, well, Rachel Roy, it's all about the maxi dress this season. So it's amazing what you learn. So what we do is, so basically you scan the QR code, Rachel gives you her advice. You have to watch the video as well. That's a metric as well. We realize people, if they see the sweepstakes, they go straight to the sweepstakes, but we have to get them to watch the video first. So they watch the video, enter the sweepstakes. They can then, there's a button at the bottom to shop online, which takes them through to a deep linked place on Macys.com, which has all of Rachel's maxi dresses. And if they've won, they can shop instantly online. So we're really doing a lot to explore that mobile space, delivering sort of information as well as entertainment through our celebrities.
Any more questions?
Thank you. Jason, I have one for you. You mentioned Rachel Roy. You guys spent a lot of money producing that stuff, and it's really beautiful.
Yep. Thank you.
By the way, I'm with AdSpace, and we have a mall network. We took a look at the Rachel Roy content, and it is so perfect for some of our digital place-based networks, like us, like Access 360. Would you ever consider cutting sort of a content deal for content like that to get it out beyond the store and into networks like that, and some sort of economic model that would work for both of us?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. I think what we've done with Macy's Backstage Pass, we realize it doesn't just live in the store and that people have their mobile devices everywhere. We're now putting the QR codes into all the pages on Macy's direct mail. There might be a direct mail that goes out with, say, 32 million households, so the QR code will appear in that in a relevant context of the fashion. We've actually just edited some of the pieces that are appearing on TV at the moment. So that we're actually definitely pushing this for screens. When it comes to actually purchasing media for it, I think that'd be a question for the Macy's media team to figure out the relevance of that. But we're definitely up for pushing this content across multiple screens, multiple devices, and now even on television.
So I'll actually take that and ask Tyler and Michelle, have you seen examples where you've taken other video content and adapted it for out-of-home? And if so, how's that worked? If the answer is no, we'll move on to another question.
Yeah, no, we've absolutely done that. I mean, the BlackBerry campaign that I referenced, due to timing, we frankly had to take some of that. And luckily, we had a really great, smart, creative team who worked with us to really help be able to put it in a form that worked wonderfully, because that was a big concern. We didn't want to just put the 30-second ad because that was not going to work at all. But yeah, we purposely, when we think about the idea and are coming up with what is the story we're going to create, and then we look at different media, it's really one of those ones where we want to try to maximize how we can do it. And so some is really let's adapt current content, but some is let's create brand new stuff because it makes sense. And even if we have to do it in a way that may not be as high quality, we want it to be as high quality as we can, but also fit that audience. And so the good news with this is we have a lot of flexibility.
Right. Any other questions? Because I have one more. Yes, no? All right, my question is, we talked about mobile, but in several of the examples that you gave, you talked about wanting people to share what they saw. So what thinking do you have about the intersection of social media and digital out of home, and how can the industry use that to create greater interest in the medium?
Yeah, I can start with that. I think from a social standpoint, we'll often create content, and you'll get the brief. This was probably several years ago. Things have changed, fortunately, that you'll get the brief and it's like, create a viral video. And a viral video you can't just create a viral video. A viral video is magic that just so happens, and one in goodness knows how many actually becomes truly viral. But it's the same, I think, with social and sharing, is that there's got to be some value in it for people. There's got to be something unique about it and some form of reward. And I think that if you're looking at actually bringing social into digital out of home, you can't just build it in for the sake of building it. I think it has to be relevant. And if you're going to invest the energy and time in creating a social campaign around digital out of home, you really need to think through, often we talk to ourselves in advertising all too much. And you really need to think, is this relevant for the customer? Will they engage with this? Will they share it? You need to make sure there's true value in a share for people.
Yeah, I mean, the way I view it is this is the way I kind of think about just social media is I think there's no way that you can't change human behavior. Humans haven't evolved much in 7 million years. And the same things that drive social 7 million years ago, I think still drives it right now, which is people are going to share something that they like. And so that's why I think it's so important to have just first a good idea, because people will talk about a good idea. And the social part is just the technologies that facilitate that discussion. But unless you have a good idea that's simple and somehow uncovers truth, it's going to be forced, And so you're not going to get the results that you want. That's why I think it's social more than just the fact that we have so much access to technology and social. It is more important than ever to have a really good idea. There's also things that you can do, and I think as an experiment with the gumball machine, you can offer something up that's still as a reward, or give me something back for giving something to you, which gives that instant gratification. And I think especially if you're talking about digital out-of-home storytelling, you need some kind of instant gratification for sharing, whether that's sharing content that's going to make you look like you have, a good, a sense of humor, or sharing content that's going to be because you like the idea for whatever reason, or sharing the idea because you're willing to give up some of you for something that you're about to get. I think that still we have to sort of get ourselves out of the technology a little bit and think about why is someone going to share with this to begin with.
Yeah, and I would only just add, I think really what we've kind of talked about is that keeping that simple and then adding the social component when it really makes sense, because you're right, if it doesn't make sense to the program, it seems awkward and odd, and frankly, the client will come back to you and say, why did we even do that? So, which is never fun. So, but I think that really with your expertise, now that you all are working with many different programs and many different brands and storytelling, I think even giving the guidance back to the team when we come up with an ideas to help us make them better and will be very helpful. And it's not very similar to what a Google would do with us, but I feel like you all, with all the different technology, that would be something that would be very helpful to hear from you too.
Great. Thank you. And now we're standing between you and lunch, I think. So let you wander on and get fed.
Thank you.